Welcome, everyone, to the second stage. I hate to call it the second stage. This is really the first stage, and there's that other stage over there where other things are happening that are not quite so interesting. We have a great lineup today of speakers and panels, and we're going to look for a lot of participation from the audience as well, so please be ready to take part, bringing in questions, comments, ideas, and thoughts. Of course, feel free to tweet on the hashtag LeWeb'. We've been getting a lot of buzz on the web with the hashtag. And first up, we have Alistair Croll, the founder of Bitcurrent, who is focused on cloud computing, human-computer interaction, and emerging technology. He will be speaking about lean analytics for startups, what every founder and VC needs to watch. So, without further ado, Alistair Croll.
Morning, guys. So I'm going to spend a little time talking about what startups need to watch in the analytics world. If I can have my slides up, please. There we go. Beautiful. I'd like to thank you all for making it to le web. Je me débrouille un peu en français. Je viens de Montréal. Alors, comme nous disons au Québec, il y a trop de bonheur. Merci d'être à LeWeb' dans les docks avec le snow et le ice. I'm going to do the rest of my presentation in English. I just wanted to prove I could speak French. If you want to yell at me or say bad things, go onto Twitter and you can follow me at Croll or comment on this and I'll try to get back to you after the session. I do a bunch of things. I write a bunch of technology documents, blogs, and run several conferences. But the reason I'm here is probably because I wrote a book called Complete Web Monitoring. It's a pretty thick book, as the name suggests. How many people here, show of hands, know what lean startups are? So lean startups is an idea proposed by a number of people as the best method we know for creating successful startups. Folks like Eric Ries and Dave McClure and Steve Blank. And these guys are often misquoted because they never actually said that startups should fail faster. Nobody wants startups to fail. What they really meant was they want startups to learn and adapt. Now there are three traditional ways, or three ways of planning software development. The first is called the waterfall software development approach. And this is what you use if you're, say, building a nuclear reactor. You want a control system for the reactor. You have a very well-known set of requirements. They've been carefully defined. And you probably know how to solve those requirements. You know what your user interface should look like and so on. So you write a spec and you build the thing and you test it and eventually you launch it. And that works great for a certain class of enterprise applications. The problem is that known set of requirements tends to go sideways. And so there's a second approach to software development known as Agile. And Agile is much more common as a way of managing software. In an Agile world, you have a known set of requirements, but it's unclear how to satisfy those requirements. So you know what you're trying to build, but you're not really clear on how to do it. And so as a result, you kind of come up with a problem statement, and then that problem statement in turn suggests what you build. You test the thing over a series of sprints. You see, is it ready to launch? And when you're done, you go and adjust and iterate on your startup. And eventually, you get to a viable product which you launch. Most of the startups we talk to today are doing Agile development. And the problem with Agile is that known set of requirements is actually a lie. It's much more likely that you don't know what your requirements are. Most startups don't even know what problem they solve. I mean, PayPal was first built for payments on Palm Pilots. FreshBooks was initially the invoicing system of a web design company. Wikipedia was going to be written by experts only. Mitel was a lawnmower company. It stands for Mike and Terry's Lawnmowers. Hotmail was initially a database company. The email thing was just so the founders could communicate during their day jobs. Flickr was going to be a massively multiplayer online game. Twitter was a podcasting company. Autodesk made desktop automation. That's all I could fit. Every startup you know probably started as something else, which means that you're starting a company in some kind of possible problem space. And the challenge is that you've got to iterate on your product or your market several times until you figure out what you're actually selling and to whom you're selling it. And in the lean startup world, we call these pivots. Now, every startup is lean at first, and that has some really important consequences. First of all, getting your features right matters a lot less, but knowing what's not working quickly matters a lot more. Saying we should matters less, but saying what if and asking questions and exploring matters more. Your product roadmap matters a lot less. Parallel experiments matter a lot more. User groups and surveys matter less, but getting real-world adoption and seeing analysis of usage by actual users matters a lot more. And here's a really important one. Business plans matter less. Business models matter more. Does everybody here know the business model for a lemonade stand? Well, I'm going to show it to you, and I'm not going to talk about it. But basically, if you sell more lemonade for more money that costs you in lemons, water, sugar, and markers, you'll probably make some money. When you set out to build a lemonade stand, you aren't really going to write a business plan for it. I mean, if someone said, okay, I'm going to write a long business plan for my lemonade stand, you'd probably laugh at that. That doesn't make a lot of sense. What you have is a fundamental business model, and you're going to iterate on that. All right, let's change subjects just for a second. It's never been a better time to start a company, and there are two reasons for that. First, cloud computing. Cloud computing is the idea of on-demand, pay-as-you-go computing resources. And clouds make experimenting easy and avoid any upfront dilution you're going to get from letting VCs take some of your money in return for some hardware. But analytics are the cool part, because analytics make experimentation possible. And I love to talk about clouds. That's what I do most of the time. But I'm going to talk about the other half of this today. I'm going to focus on what to watch on your website if you're a startup. How many people here are with startups? That's good. You're in the right place. So here's a quick list. I'm going to post these slides on Bitcurrent shortly. I'll give you the URL at the end, so if you want the list, you can get it afterwards. Let's talk first about what we could watch, because there's a lot of stuff. As that book's name suggests, complete web monitoring is a big thing. There's topics like analytics and usability and the awful portmanteau of performability, community, voice of the customer, competitors, and so on. Real briefly, analytics is the measurement of movement towards your business goals. So here's the simplest possible explanation of web analytics. You get a bunch of attention on your website. Some of that leads to bad things, users that leave immediately. It's called bouncing. Some is users that become new visitors and add to your user base. That's new visitors. That's great. Those people do stuff on your site, either a certain number of pages per visit, a certain amount of time on your site, and eventually they do something you want. Hopefully they buy something for some amount, or they post a certain number of comments. Now, people who spend their time looking at web analytics track key performance indicators, or KPIs. And so a KPI might be, for example, the idea of a bounce rate. A bounce rate is people leaving the site, or conversion rate, the people that actually make it through the process. And your business is going to change depending on whether you're a software as a service company, or a content company, or an e-commerce company, or a media company, but you're going to track something, whether that's bounce rate or shopping cart abandonment. Clearly, I spend way too much time on Flickr, or looking at traffic or content creation. Whatever you're tracking, analytics is the measurement of movement of users towards those goals. But analytics isn't the only thing we can track. We can also track things like usability through things like heat maps, through form completion tools that show you how far down a screen someone got and what field in a form they're abandoning at, through user surveys where you're asking people what they think. We can also track the health of the site. I brought a few error messages here from Canada, but sites fail in all kinds of interesting ways. And you might think this is the job of some operations person with a ponytail, but it's probably not. This is Google Wave crashing. Both of the users were really angry. Come on, that's morning humor. Let me show you an example of how availability like this affects the marketing side. This is an email I got from PayPal. And it says, if I click on the link, it's going to paypal-surveys.com. Show of hands how many people think that's a legitimate email. Everybody thinks that's fake? Okay, so I click on it, and it gives me this. How many people think it's legitimate now? So it turns out, I called a friend of mine at PayPal. This was a legitimate survey. No, none of you would have responded to it. Two things. The DNS was set up wrongly, and the SSL cert had expired. There's someone in marketing at PayPal pulling out their hair because no one will answer their survey because someone in operations broke everything. That's why you need to look at more than web analytics to understand the health of your application or your business. We should also care about performance. Until recently, we didn't spend a lot of time on performance, but companies like Google showed the world that when they slowed the site down, things got really slow. And you might think that a 0.6% drop in searches is not a lot of money, but according to Google's handy calculator, that's $7.29 billion of their 2010 revenue. Their estimates for 2010 revenue, $43,740,000. That's quite a lot of money for running a test to slow down a site. Microsoft, not to be outdone, shared some data that showed that nearly every important KPI associated with a search engine goes down when it's slow. Shopzilla did a big site makeover. This was a great experiment. As a result, they saw an increase in revenue between 5 and 12%. They saw an increase in their page ranks. And we did some research of our own where we put people on various sites through an optimizer, and we compared the optimized to unoptimized users. This data is available from a research report we published. And it shows that users that were optimized visit more, come back more, bounce about 1% less. That means they arrive on the site and leave immediately less, spend more time on the site, view more pages per visit, have a 16% higher chance of converting, and a 5% higher shopping cart. So if you think performance doesn't matter, think again. And then there's also community monitoring, watching your community. Now, until recently, this was kind of bunnies and hugs and friending and happiness, but community management has kind of grown up in the last while. People have realized that community management is really analyzing the start of a very long funnel that leads to your websites. So we all understand things like unpaid search, and we understand things like banner ads and email campaigns. It's not as clear how to track community mentions. I'll show you that in a second. There is, however, a danger in looking at all this data. That's a lot of eye candy, but a lot of it is vanity metrics. All it does is serve to tell you how beautiful you think you are rather than helping your business. So in the second half of my presentation, I'm going to talk about what you should actually watch. In a startup, the purpose of analytics is to iterate to a product market fit before the money runs out. That's the most important slide of this presentation. Your only reason to use analytics is to iterate as quickly as you can across products and markets until you find a fit before your money runs out. This is a bit of an eye candy chart, but I'm going to go through each one in detail. The first thing you should watch is something called viral coefficient. Viral coefficient is simply, when I get a user, how many other people do they tell? If it's more than one, you're happy. The best example of this is Hotmail, because every mail anyone ever sent contained a link that made that person infected by the message. And in fact, the growth of Hotmail over time almost exactly fits a prediction made in 1960s by a guy named Bass called the Bass diffusion curve that shows how viral messages propagate. Now, there's a lot of formulas for viral estimates, and you really don't want to try and figure them out, so I'll give you a simpler one. Viral coefficient is simply how many new users you've got times the chance that they're going to tell someone something, minus the churn or abandonment. And if that's greater than 1, you're happy, and if it's less than 1, you're miserable because you'll have to spend money on marketing. The second thing you want to watch, how well are my messages being amplified? Let's talk for a minute about Twitter. I have a single user here. That user has 4 followers. Not a very happy user, but has lots of followers. And each of those followers has a chance of retweeting that user's message, some percentage. And so you could say that at first, this person has 4 users following them downstream. And based on the chances that those people retweet them, there's another 2 users in there for 6 total. And then those people propagate downstream, and so on and so on. And you have this idea of aggregate downstream reach. And that matters for 2 things. It means how many people do you have uniquely downstream from you in someone's tree? And it means what's the chance that someone's going to amplify that? And if you think this looks like complicated math, realize that it's almost exactly like the Google PageRank algorithm, and lots of companies are currently building tools to do this. Now, if you want to think about how that affects a funnel, here's the traditional funnel we saw before. This is the number of people that saw a message suggesting they do something on Twitter or Facebook or wherever. This is the number of people that initially seeded the message, your friends that you told about it or whatever. And then there's some amount of amplification, those people telling their friends. And there's going to be some amount of leakage or repurposing. Maybe someone posts it on Reddit or they mention it on Facebook. Depending on how you're doing your startup, you're going to change this model. So if your goal is to make people very aware of a message, then you're going to tune your campaign or your social media approach to maximize the chances that someone retweets it. That's a little different from if you're trying to get a message out there to a number of influential people. You're going to choose people who have a very large following. And that could be different from a call to action where you're trying to get people to actually do something where it matters that the message causes them to click rather than retweet. And ideally you want all 3 of these, but you're going to have to focus your campaign somehow. We did a campaign for a charity, an organization in Canada called Visible Government, where you bought your country a beer on Canada Day to raise money for government transparency. We had about 20 very influential bloggers that initially supported this thing and said they'd mention it. They had collectively about 700,000 followers. Those 700,000 followers mean that there was a seed ratio of about 35,000 to 1. Those followers, in turn, leaked the stuff onto 2 other networks, so that's a repurposing. Those guys also had about 150 retweets across them to another 2,000 people who weren't in the original 700,000 followers, so there's a 2.9% amplification rate. Around 1,640 people came to the site. That's 0.2% of people who saw the message clicked on the link. 32 of them actually donated, and they could donate at a different tier of you could buy a round, a pitcher, or a bottle of beer. And that led to a total revenue of about $1,000. It wasn't a lot, but it was a very short campaign. If you're running social media in your company and you show the CEO something like this, he or she will be delighted because nobody has this kind of visibility. Next question, how performable are we? How healthy is the infrastructure? This is a matter of knowing how many visitors do we get and how many of them fell within some kind of threshold, and did that correlate with the conversion rate and traffic on the site? You also care, what do visitors think of us? Both on the site, which is voice of the customer survey, stuff like this, and out in social communities using sentiment analysis or other tools. You need to know how engaged your users are. This is really important. I had one VC told me they would have saved $9 million had they done this analysis and passed on a particular startup. Engagement is basically measured in something like days since last visit. So imagine in January, I have number of users and days since last visit. On the left, I have the number of users. That means that roughly 400 users were here yesterday. And another 400 were here 2 days ago, and about 600 were here 3 days ago, and so on. And then I compare that to February. Wow, that's actually really good because the number of users that were here 1 or 2 days ago has increased. So I can see that more people are coming back more often. And then I do the overall comparison, how many people haven't been here in more than 10 days. I can see disengagement is up. This is a really painful chart, but it's a necessary chart. And if VCs don't ask for it, they're probably not paying attention. You need to know your core goals driving the business. Remember that business model we talked about? If you have a model like this and you take the data in there, how much are people paying for lemonade? How many lemons are they buying? What does it cost you per cup? That's the kind of stuff you need to tie into your analytics. You also have the idea of extended funnel abandonment. And this isn't just web stuff. There's a great site called Product Planner that gives you very great detail into lots of different companies' viral loops and mechanisms. This is the Twitter viral loop, and it's showing the contact viewing in the email. It's step 2 of a 7-step process. Each of these steps has to be something you track because they're essential to your business model. We also want to know in the last build what moved us towards and away from goals. So if we know what our funnel looked like last build and we know what it looks like now, maybe we've made it easier to sign up, but instead of sharing the site with other people, they're now signing up. So we've lost a little of our viral coefficient, but we've gained our conversion rate. I need to know that change, right? Because if I need to make revenues versus I need to expand market, those changes are very important to me. I also need to know the cost per visitor. This is a very awkward question. What does it cost me per visitor to my site? And this had better be greater than the revenues and the conversion rate on your site, otherwise you're going bankrupt. You can find all this stuff out very early on, and if you put the instrumentation into your site at the start, you'll be much better armed for board meetings and better able to do those pivots quickly. You care about the peak to average ratio. This is an example of ad spend for the flowers and gifts market. And the peak on the left, anybody know what that is? Christmas and Valentine's Day, right? People are using elastic technology for this. I said I wasn't going to talk about clouds, but I will briefly. This is the Amazon Web Services spot market. And on here you can see the peak where people are buying more on-demand units and roughly doubling the price of an on-demand unit from 4 cents to 8 cents an hour at Christmas, and a little higher than that at Valentine's Day. So people are actually building stuff elastically. In fact, a friend of mine who runs the infrastructure at Reddit said every VC he talks to right now is passing on companies that are not using cloud computing, at least for their elastic growth. Finally, there's the idea of minimum sustainable burn. And this is the really tough question. If you had to stop the company and just keep the lights on, what's the minimum money you could do it on? Because if you can't be an out-of-the-box, really going well, super fast growth company, maybe you can make it as the market gets used to your idea or other shifts occur. And to do that, you need to make sure that you can run the company at a very low cost, and you should be tracking your minimum sustainable burn. That's a variant on the idea of what's your runway based on cash flow. But a lot of times you can stay alive if you keep the company quiet because your infrastructure is pay as you go. So that was a whirlwind tour of 12 things you probably want to watch if you're a startup. If you go to bitcurrent.com, there should be already an embedded SlideShare presentation that has this content on it. Here's some URLs and contact information if you want to reach me. Thank you all very much.